Hi, my name is Jonathan Mark. I'm with Flyby News, flybynews.com, an online internet website that's been around since the 1990s. We started off with 1997 to expose a high-risk flyby of Earth by the Cassini space probe. We learned this from Professor Carl Grossman that explained how the military was taking over space, and we wanted to end the arms race. So right after the Cassini flyby, we aimed to stop weapons from entering outer space. But going back again to the Cassini flyby, I received a really interesting call from someone that was challenging, to say the least. He was saying that humans were very advanced in pre-Ice Age times, and he wanted to comment on the Cassini because of all the plutonium it was using on board. 72.3 pounds of highly radioactive plutonium. You can learn all about the Cassini flyby at flybynews.com, and our special guest, Bart Jordan, who's here. Now we're in Dover, New Hampshire, and we're going to be asking him to explain a lot of things that he wrote during the commentary of the Cassini, plus recent discoveries and much, much more. Thanks for coming, Bart, and having me here. And now I'm going to let you maybe introduce yourself. What would you say about yourself to someone asking you, knowing that you're involved with pre-Ice Age civilizations, and how did you get into it? What did you learn, and what's your message?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy that you were the one who initiated that by virtue of what you reported. I think that where it starts for me actually is when I'm about 5 years old. My grandfather, my mother's father, who was Irish or Bavarian by background, started to interest me in looking at language as a science rather than just as something you learn in order to communicate on the everyday. And the reason for that was well, I asked him a question, first of all. He had a huge shortwave radio. I think he could hear the chattering of the monkeys in Zamboanga that have no tails. I'm not sure, but he could pick up everything, and he was able, like his mother, to negotiate his way with about 10 languages. So he listened throughout the time to advents and events that were connected with the war in progress. Because of course it hit in 41 for us, right, but it had started in Europe before that time.
Okay.
And I wanted to learn the family languages, which essentially were German on one side and French on the other, and my grandfather said no. And I was a little stunned by the statement, but at the same time, brief as it was, I thought, well, there must be something in the top of his mind, and it was that I should learn ancient languages before modern ones would become too much of a focus for me. So he said the oldest language in the world, of which there is a scientific root for, is Greek. I expected him to say Sanskrit or something, or Sumerian or something, because I knew he had a vast amount of knowledge, but he didn't. He said Greek. And so I said, okay, well, we'll begin there. So before the year was out, I was 5 years old, I deciphered the music notation of ancient Greece. And it was all based on a particular gravestone that was in what would be ancient Tralles, but modern Aydin in Turkey. It was found by Ramsey, archaeologist and whatnot, but it was the only complete anything that gave a text and the music line above that text. And indeed it was Greek. That was understandable because it was probably put there around the 1st century AD. That's very late in the day, but at least it would be looking back, an eclectic work, looking back on something that was developed much earlier, in the idea of the language actually being a way to conduct one through music that had a cosmological connection. In other words, one that was based on the movement of the planets and so on.
Okay.
So I became very interested in that, and at the same time, I had in my mind an image that I had received in a dream, and I can show you that image. It is essentially a raindrop, but the colors represent red for south and summer, orange for west and autumn, green for east and spring, and blue for north and winter. It also was father, son, daughter, mother. And the image in between was a dove descending, and you can see the fuselage, in effect, of the body of the dove and then the wings on either side. Well, I became very interested in what it was doing and why it was doing, why it was that shape. And I realized after time that it sort of followed a yin-yang aspect of 1 at the north, 2 at northeast, 3 at east, and 4 at southeast, and then it had to cross the zenith or the center and go up here and have 5 at the northwest, and then 6 at west, 7 at southwest, and 8 finally at the bottom. Now this meant that 1, 2, 3, 4 across the line in the center, 5, 6, 7, 8 was the perfect origin of the yin-yang. That was very clear. Not only that, but you had the opposition of 1 opposite 8, 2 opposite 7, 3 opposite 6, and 4 opposite 5. All 9s in every case. So then I realized, okay, then this must be the dove descending that represents Venus, or Aphrodite. My family always said, as did most everyone else, Aphrodite. And of course, when I knew the Greek to be Aphrodite, I said to myself, oh, Aphrodite without her nightie? But I didn't dare say that too often. Anyway, it was interesting because the 1 times the 2 times the 5 times the 8 was 80. This portion here was 80. And then 3 times the 4 times 6 times 7 was 504 with the wings. And that was a total of 584. And that is the number of days it takes for Venus to come back in the same place in the sky. Synodical revolution.
From the Earth perspective?
Yes, from the Earth forming conjunction with the Sun, yes. So it's actually 583.921. But if you're not splitting hairs, it is or picking pepper out of something.
Well, were you splitting hairs when you were 5 years old?
Well, I didn't really intend to split hairs. I was trying to discover why it was that the Greeks had one view of the average number for the average person, and then had a scientific reading that was a bit more critical.
Right.
And so that kind of thing interested me very much.
Okay, wait, how did that interest you? You're 5 years old. You must have had a sort of a feeling for science.
Oh, yes.
And what generated that? Just, was it natural, or was your family, or?
Well, I think first of all, my grandfather had a very unusual library, very unusual to say the least. Many subjects, and not a few of them were science oriented. So I was very interested in astronomy, and I knew that I had a visual impairment, so I didn't try to use telescopes so much as I tried to project what was out there. Sometimes I got it right, sometimes I got it wrong, but you know, I worked at it. Anyway, this image, it was interesting because once I had drawn it, and mind you, you're looking at something here which is a photograph of a watercolor, but I had originally done it in pencil and crayon. Now that story is a little bit wide of the mark for where we want to be, but I just will state it because it's one of the few times that I could actually say I could do something in the way of reportage concerning something very personal. Now, I've been working on this for most of the day when I could. I wasn't finished by nightfall, and my father came up and he said, "Lights out." Well, when my father said lights out, it was lights out. So I put away everything, and he went downstairs, and of course not too long after he had done so, I had a dump truck that had some very good lights in it that had batteries, and so I set it up on my mother's easel. Now my mother was Barbara Schwinn. She was the most highly regarded female illustrator in the 40s and then 50s and so on. She was America's foremost woman illustrator. Well, anyway, she had her easel in my room, and of course my instruction was to never go near it. Now, I set the truck up on her. Her illustration was over to one side, but I set the truck up so that the lights would be on my drawing and allowing me to finish it. The thing is, I put the truck away, I put the crayons away and the pencil away, but I forgot to take the drawing away. So my mother found it in the morning, and boy did I catch HE double hockey sticks.
Why?
Because the crayon and the pencil both had like little graphite things with the pencil and little greasy crayon things that could get on my mother's drafting or her illustration rather, and I caught it. Well, I won't say what happened from there directly, but the point is I was well advised never to do anything like that again. But in the meantime, I had my drawing, and she didn't destroy it, which surprised me a bit. But later, my grandfather, seeing it, said, "I'll give you some tools to do it properly." So that's what you see, the result. And I had some beautiful acrylics that I made of this and other things that you will see. And it took months and months and months to do those, and it took actually over a series of years to do all of it. And unfortunately, it was destroyed on one day, 27th of October, 2004, when where I live in public housing, they moved my apartment from my 103 to 303, where I reside today, claiming that mold was in everything and therefore they had to destroy it. Well, they didn't, because that's not actually what happened at all. But they did so, and of course I've been trying to dig my way out of that hole ever since.
Is that partly the reason why all those things that you said you were going to publish after the Cassini Flyby has been delayed?
That's correct. That's correct. I was actually only about maybe 6 months at the most away from publishing a series of articles which had been gathered together as a book. Mm-hmm. And
was that the alphabet and the string?
Well, that was a separate article, but yes, it would have been included. But the basic book was Deciphering the Distant Past, just as the same as the article that was here in the Public Occurrences paper. And so it never came to be because of that. And I still have a distance to go to try to put something back, and of course my ability to do so today is quite limited because the vision hasn't improved. But in any event, this is where it started, and it was very interesting because someone brought me to the notice of Vine Deloria's aunt, who taught at Columbia, and she was a American Indian who had a PhD and was an extraordinary woman on her own. And when she saw it, it didn't take her very long to say, "You are the one we have waited for. You will tell us what we need to know about ourselves." And what she was referring to there was the Dakota, the Lakota, and the Nakota. And everybody can hear that. The Kota is the only thing that remains the same. But it was a thing which was sort of a call to the moment of what my grandfather had spoken of. The fact that the language was so old and the alphabetic structure so entirely old that in being so old, it probably was pretty much stretched across the globe as we know it to be. And it was not surprising to find Amerindian peoples with a full knowledge of the sound order of the Greek alphabet. It was a shock for linguists, I'm sure, because they didn't expect it, any more than they would expect a far-reaching relationship between the ancient Greeks, and then we're talking about something that was even pre-Homeric, to be in China amongst the Shang. But it's Shang dynasty. But there too, there were many images that I was able to reconstruct from the Shang period in terms of the origin of the characters in Chinese that were ordered exactly the same, and in fact, ironically, one of them identically to this, except that they don't use the outer lines; they use the inner lines, and so the image for Xing today would be in Chinese a star, and of course, what is Venus but the great star? Yeah. So it's quite understandable, Dai Xing. So anyway, I can tell you that the Shang presented a particular interest for me when I looked into it, because again, my grandfather had these things, in his library, and I was able to borrow and discover for myself. Plus, I had Chinese friends, and that was also very helpful because they were my own age, and of course, they chatted back and forth in Chinese, and I just had to know what was going on. So the Shang actually took their name, and probably it was a given by the Greek. Because the thing is, you have a sigma, followed by an eta, followed by an alpha, followed by a nu, followed by a gamma. That spells out Shang in any way you want to look at it. And the thing is, it adds to, with each letter in Greek being a number, it adds to 262. Well, now, even today in Chinese, the sign that you see on all Chinese laundries, all Chinese restaurants, all Chinese anything, the sign for the middle people of the earth, it doesn't refer to the middle in the sense of the equator, but rather the middle of the tilt that goes from either north or west to southeast or northeast to southwest. And that tilt is at a 45 conveniently. And the interesting thing about that is when the Greeks did their original size of the earth, they did it according to I know I'm going to get in trouble with this, but the foot, the so-called English or British foot, and of course it's not some great royal brute of Britain putting his foot down saying that's my foot. That's total rubbish.
You're saying this measurement was way back?
Yes, it was way back. It was in the Ice Age. It was fairly clear. But the thing was that Shang was very interesting because it reflects exactly what is the character in Chinese to this day. It's not a Shang character, but I mean it's coming from that same source. Now, why middle? Middle people of the earth. Well, everybody wants to be the center of attention, they say, but in this case, it's not that. It's that the Greeks had devised a middle position where the actual number that applied to the measurement of the earth was 131,262,131 feet. Now, that was the middle measure on either tilt side, which gave you an understanding of, therefore, with 131 as outriggers on either side of the 262, what is it? It's 262 by half. They fold it out. Right. So it was brilliant. Now, what about the equatorial measure? Well, the 131s were still on the outside, but the one in the middle, the monkey in the middle, was 484. And so, what about the polar? Well, that was 040. So they were all palindromic. That's the point.
It's very symmetrical.
That's the whole point. It reads the same from the right as from the left.
Well, why is it like? Tell me, why do you think so many of these numbers have this aspect of symmetry to it?
Well, because they looked upon the whole thing sort of like a resonating string, and the musical string, and they wanted to make it clear that things had a reciprocal resonance by virtue of their construction. Either it was right in front of your face, or it was something that was derived by virtue of a mathematical operation. That's why the word Shang, for example, not only means merchant, but it also means quotient. But in the case of Shang, that's understandable that they would have had cooperative scientific work that was done. This is also true of the Indus Valley, because these are very ancient cultures as well. This is true of Sumeria, and I think I fairly shocked Samuel Noah Kramer many moons later than what my grandfather and I had worked together by appearing down there at University of Pennsylvania under the aegis of one Schuyler Cammon, who had been former director of the the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia. And he told Samuel Noah Kramer, he said, give him words from the Sumerian that he couldn't possibly know and ask him if he can determine the meaning from the sound. So I got 8 out of 10. And the reason I didn't get the others, in part, is because the transliteration of that sound was not accurate. And so I couldn't do with anything with that. But he did express surprise. So he said, what you're telling me by this demonstration is that Greek is older as a language form. It's older than Sumerian. And I said, well, Dr. Kramer, that's a foregone conclusion. It has to be, you know. And then I proceeded to show him a number of other things in terms of the ceilings which had not been properly identified. And he began to see, oh, then this is actually something that may be not only older, but better organized than anything that we have thought of thus far. And I said, yeah, that's the whole point. It's the organization which is so staggeringly brilliant. Because they made things simple. I mean, actually, when you teach a child 131, 262, 131, and show them that 22 or 222,000 up or down either way is going to give you the polar and the equatorial, I think it's pretty staggering, because a child says, oh, wow. And so everything changes from the middle of the earth outward and back and forth like an accordion and so on. And of course it's true. But children want to know why something is what it is, especially when it doesn't look right. And unfortunately they get very early schooled out of the idea that what doesn't look right has to be right because somebody in authority said so. I think there's a book with the title Lies My Teacher Told Me, or something like that. And there are always things that are worthy of question. And one of the things that I thought was worthy of question was, why did we have these wonderful color correspondences with direction and family and all these things that made sense? Why did we have them overturned by later cultures? And that presented a real problem for me, because that was a much bigger question, very much bigger question. And I think what one has to say is that, you know, why does one see mother goddesses everywhere in the Ice Age? I mean, there's practically nowhere you look you don't see them. And yes, they look less like Venus de Milo and more like Venus de Kilo, but as one of the scholars who studied this brace of material was wont to say from time to time, didn't originate with me. But anyway, you see them all there in the Ice Age, and right up through the High Neolithic. And then all of a sudden you see man on the scene with spear raised against spear. It took a long time for that to happen. And in that number of century upon century upon century wherein it did not happen, you had the kind of coordinative effort on the part of these ancient societies to share their knowledge. When the doors closed and the parapets went up and the ramparts and so on and so forth, the walled cities and the like, that's when people began to try to knock them down. And information was not so easily shared. And of course, one of the great epics of all time, if not the greatest epic of all time, was the Iliad and the Odyssey together. Now here again, here's something where anybody could have done what I did in the beginning. I simply decided, okay, I'm going to make a study of this. I'm going to at least count the lines that Homer put down. So I discovered that there were 15,693 lines in the Iliad, and there were 12,109 lines in the Odyssey. And I looked at those two figures after I had counted them all 3 or 4 times to make sure, and said, oh, now I understand the conflict between the Greeks and the Trojans. Because the conflict goes to the conflict, but also the somewhat what happened before and what happened afterward, but also the idea that they were preserving something even in recording the conflict. And what they were preserving, aside from everything else, if you added them, was that you had the number 2, followed by 780 and 2. So it looked like something that didn't need that much in the way of explanation, except when I began to realize, what was this about? It wasn't about a picnic in the park. This was a war, and the fallout from that whole event. Well, the 2 apparently was going to the music system in relation to the sun, or the solar period. And the other 2 on the other side was the lunar. But in between, the 780 was definitely Mars. Cyanotic revolution of saying.
Okay.
Now, if God is a god because he's a god of something, what is the god associated with Mars? The god of war. So it's a somewhat unfair call because originally Ares was looked upon just as a father, and Aphrodite was looked upon as a mother. By the way, the word for Aphrodite is actually 2 words. It's from aphos, foam that gathers on the sea waves, and then dite is not independently said in Greek, in any case, but it does imply division, and she's supposed to have come out of the waves. And there's some other aspects of the legend which are not quite so nice. But anyway, the point is that it does reflect on the fact that both of these cases have a relationship with the original 5. There was, and I do mean they were the original, there was Ares, there was Phobos, Harmonia, Deimos, and Aphrodite. Now, the Greek letters added up to 309, 842, 272, 329, and 993. The total would be 2745. Now, Venus was the goddess of the mirror, and I remember being asked several times in various lectures why she was the goddess of the mirror. And I can't remember all the excuses I gave for what that combination probably reflected. But one of them I said, well, it just took her a moment to make up her face, but a millennium to make up her mind. And in one of those lectures, I heard some girl somewhere in the class say, misogynist, in a low voice, and I thought to myself, yes, dear, that's right. Yes, that would make anybody's reasonable guess. But in point of fact, she was the slowest moving thing in the solar system. And for a long time, they couldn't determine how long it took her to rotate on her axis. In fact, they couldn't because she had cloud cover. And it was impossible to penetrate that until you had radar and so on and so forth. So what I did was I said to people quite confidently, I said, well, you know, the Greeks say that she has this number 243, which applies to probably her rotation. No proof of that, but I think we ought to look at that possibility. And of course I was told I was full of, you know, and I just let it go, and let it go, and let it go for years. I just, and they said, well, you know, from time to time, how did you think that? And I said, well, if she's 993 in count, Aphrodite is, then what's 9 times 9 times 3? Isn't it 243?
I believe you.
Yeah, so they'd say, oh, that's numerology, or that's something, you know, it'd be very dismissive.
But the number, I mean, you get these numbers from what's called gematria, the alphabet to number system?
Well, that's a later development. Actually, these things come from a lot longer back than that. And it is governed by much more stringent rules.
Okay.
And the thing is, but what was interesting about the goddess of the mirror was, I just gave you the numbers involved. Well, you could take Ares' number, Phobos' number, Harmonia's would remain the same because it's 272, so you can't do it, it's a fulcrum in itself. And then your 329 and then 993. You could turn those numbers around completely. It still comes to the same sum, 2745. It's the only case in mathematics.
Really?
Yes. And I think that that's an indication of their extraordinary brilliance, because they chose something which they could then apply to the end numbers reading in, which would be obviously 99 in terms of total, and you would have therefore something that would read like 99.2745 or 2745.99. One or the other had to apply. Well, I looked at the possibility of the abundance of certain isotopes, because I began to realize that what they were talking about was in terms of the abuse of light, something that was much broader than just the figure that I started with.
Okay.
And what I found was the abundance level for uranium-238 was indeed 99.2745. And that was being measured by other people. So I wasn't, just talking silliness. I mean, it was something that could be backed up by what was actually found in the ground, which was interesting because it means every other isotope, has to deal with less than 1%, which tells you something about the 235 that the Hiroshima bomb was made out of, and then Nagasaki, of course, was not a natural event at all. That was everything after 92 becomes something that is transuranium or made by man. A no-no from the ancient point of view. Anyway, that being said, I went to many of these things with a very open mind, expecting to be trashed and thrown to the ground over everything I had to say, because after all, it couldn't be that. I think that what I wanted to do was to give the ancient people the voice I knew they had. And it came through me, and I never said that these were, quote, my products in a sense, because all I was doing was acting as a receiver and just putting them down. And I was, in the most ancient of Greek forms, thought of as a samanamas, which probably is the origin, even though it's in the Siberian form of shaman, shaman. It doesn't take long to get from one to the other, any more than with German, which has the SH sound. Is like in the difference, well, it's not even a good difference, like school and shul, that kind of thing. But the Saman Namas was a very easy thing to determine for me, because one side added up to 292 and the other side added 292, and of course the total was 584, Venus back again to the same source. Now, the 272, by the way, is 20 less, which is the rainbow less, because it's red, orange, yellow, green, blue, which of course, and of course, the white is the original thing, and then you have prismatically the change up in the colors. But you have 4, 6, 2, 3, 5 in the way in which it's arranged on that circle that I first pointed out. And what's interesting about that is that these are standard, and they become the basis for the letter formation for alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon. So that's what starts the whole mess off. And I say it is a mess because it's become a mess, but not because it should be. It's because people got careless with the information.
In your commentary in the Cassini, you mentioned that the Phobos and Deimos were most likely placed in orbit by past time. What made you believe that? Because of these symmetrical elements, and they also look like asteroids. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I was just wondering how you knew that.
Well, I didn't really know it. I just assumed that there had to be something that explained the oddity of one coming from the west and one coming from the east, and both of them hugging an equatorial line, which was pretty good when it came to the variation in that cosmic hula hoop or whatever, because it was something you would expect more of a variance to be there, and there really wasn't. So eccentricities aside, you would have to ask yourself, how did they come? I mean, two asteroids, they can't be captured because of the fact they're too small.
Right.
So the attractability, the gravity thing doesn't work. So many other things didn't work, and I think one of the Russian scholars said he thought they were hollow. Well, I wasn't prepared to go with that, but I wasn't prepared to go against it either, because I thought to myself, he has a theory here based on something that we really can't determine at this point, but one thing is clear. He's willing to see that there's a very great likelihood that they did not come to that territory that they now were surrounding by accident. It was a meaningful thing. And of course, I do believe that whether they are carbonaceous chondrites or they are other than that, they definitely are an anomalistic element with respect to their position as asteroids. But they could have been formed from the asteroid belt by people whose technologies were far superior to ours.
So your premise is that over 100,000 years ago, this human civilizations on Earth were all over the solar system, and they embedded this information into ancient language.
I think that I would have to say, I don't think that humans were ever anywhere else but here. I think they're a product of here. I don't believe necessarily in the idea of alien this, alien that. And certainly what speaks highly against it is the very thing that makes up this article here, because the one of the deciphering this past. Because I reconstructed the oldest notation that we have for menstruation and gestation. And the point is, I don't think that a culture that would have been organized on the basis of the whole calendrical involvement plus the figures that were generated from it, I don't think that they would have, let's put them in the order that they actually appear. I don't think that they would have done this if they were aliens and base it on menstruation and gestation. I don't think so. It just doesn't come together in my mind. But the other thing is that apparently nobody bothered, even when I asked them to do so, to look at the fact of the way the notation was designed, because that really was another story altogether. And the other question that I had was, I said, look, Venus is 584, yes, but she's 583.921, and if you add those numbers across, they're 28.
Okay.
So they don't leave out much in the way of opportunity for you to see something, if you will. Yeah, it's a question of whether you want to
So
take
why
time.
is 28 significant to you?
Because of the fact you have 28 average days up to the point of the cycle beginning again. Now, we all know that there are departures from the cycle.
Right.
Some menstrual periods are far less, some are far greater, but the average, the mean, before man started interrupting it with all these other things, was definitely 28, and amongst indigenous cultures, it's still the case.
Right.
Now, that's interesting because at the same time, they used the equipment that was given. You have 14 individual finger segments. That's a metacarpal, you don't count that.
Okay.
There, but everything else is a segment, and there are 12 here and 2 here. Well, it's 14 days up to the point of ovulation, 14 days down, right? So the point is, there's your 28, and how does it come to the 280? Well, you have 10 fingers, don't you?
Yeah.
So you gather them in prayer and hope the baby will emerge. 280 days,
Okay.
40 weeks. Now, doctors for a long time kept telling their patients, probably still some do, I wish they'd catch up with the information, but that it's 9 months, and that's bloody rubbish. It's not 9 months, it's 10 months of average 28 days.
Right.
What is in English law, going way back, it's called the common law month.
Okay.
And when I was a child, I couldn't use the word menstruation. Oh my goodness, soap would find its way to my mouth real quick if I did. So, no, I was allowed to speak of it only as the common law month.
I see.
And here's what's interesting about that. If you look at mens menses, the moon aspect, in Latin, you have the basis for menstruation and mensuration, which is measure, and I mean, it's right there. The Romans didn't do too much that was other than Greek, but when they tried to express it, they wanted to have something even closer in description of how they saw the calendar shaping up. and for their purposes. But it was interesting because they say that the apple never falls too far from the tree. Well, it is true that in the early going, Latin wasn't developed enough for them even to deal with their neighbors effectively as the armies that they put up. So they had to conduct, their officers had to conduct their battle plans in Greek.
Okay.
And that's something that even Roman scholars should be more careful to observe. There isn't any real evidence that they could have dealt with, say, the Etruscans effectively if they had tried to do so with just the Roman or language at that time. The thing is, it would not have been sufficient, I believe. And of course, many of their drill instructors were in effect Spartans, or people who had been part of those campaigns in the early going. They didn't do very well by paying the Greeks back later, but then again, the Greeks didn't do too well by themselves either.
But our involvement together, because I was interested in the Cassini Flyby, and you too, mostly because of plutonium on board, and I'm kind of interested. You told me some incredible stories of how you were involved with the Manhattan Project and the scientists, and that kind of is what brought us together and made this urgent for us to maybe share what the past knew, because they were, as you say, communicating to their future, which is our present.
Right.
So I want to get back to that direction with
Surely.
Especially the plutonium aspect and the, as you say, the cesium number, which you claim to have contributed to science. Could you
I did.
give that background a little bit?
Well, the cesium, I would defer to the sort of the end of the point that I would make about the other. But what happened with the Manhattan Project, I will go to in a moment. I just want to say that where I was taking this as far as the Mother Goddess figures was concerned, I realized that if there were a very light and bright side of Venus, there was also the dark side. It was the difference between, say, Lakshmi. It's a bad association to make, but it's a difference between, say, Lakshmi on the one hand and Kali on the other, or Kali on the other. I think that there are these aspects of Venus which are not happily received by some people who look into the extensions of the legend and the differences that they apply and so on. But the actual figure itself, I did have this on the cover of the calendrical art, it was a gridded form, which I did. That was the gridded form, and that's how you actually generate the form through the methods that I outlined in the article. But the point is, if you look at the gridded form and you look at the actual figure, it's not the same size directly, but this is the figure, and you can hold that up.
Yeah. When was the figure discovered?
That was southern France, and it's called a Le Bouc statuette. And of course, the difference is this one shows the arms on the front, but originally they would have been on the back. Oh. But the thing is, the figure is the figure, and the form is very clear.
Right.
Now, what's interesting about all of that is that there were aspects of the figure analysis which went to, say, horizontal forms. The one that is illustrated here is the mountain version, where the legend, I won't go into it, but the legend gives you a mountain form of Venus. It looks like something like a set of mountains might look. Mm-hmm. And certainly reminiscent of the pyramid that has recently been found with a flat top and so on.
Right.
The legs here are akimbo, but otherwise she's at the ready with regard to copulation or childbirth, and so on. And this is the wave version. Well, just one uses the compass and the other one uses the straight edge. It's very simple, but it's the same formula in both cases. There are many representations of this, many. But the thing is, they all go to the same basic formula. And that same formula is actually going to give you versions of it that are like our five-pointed star and so on and so forth. There are all manner of things that were done by various cultures, but they did embrace the main form here, which was one that would lead one to question why did certain images take front and center after a time. And one of those images was connected with the original. You can't see them because they're too small here, but they're the original colors.
Some of these.
So the colors you had for red, and then you have red and yellow, which together make orange, so you have a split red thing here. And then you have here yellow and then blue, and it goes to green here, which is splitting the blue. But then you also have this split yellow one, which could be interpreted as white because that's what happens prismatically. But it also interested me why that seemed to connect with something that also spoke of the abuse of light. And I was working on this one day in the East Hampton Library, East Hampton, Long Island, and where my family summered. And in that general area. Actually, we were living in Amagansett at the time, but I would take my bike and my dog into the library, and the dog would sit outside, and I would do my work, and then the dog would go home with me. But I was always very well protected. Not that I needed to be that much, but the dog thought so. So anyway, I can tell you, one day I was sitting there doing it, and this gentleman, who was older than my father, stopped, and he said, "Son, what is it you have there? Can I ask you?" And I said, "Well, you just have." "Yeah, sure." I said, "It's ancient Greek signs, which have to do with the basis upon which they formed the alphabet, especially as applied to music." And he said, "Oh, well, can you tell me more about that?" So I did, and then he said, do you know Dr. Alfred Loomis?" I said, "Well, or you've heard of him, I guess is what he asked." And I said, "Yes, I've heard of him." I said, "He's a family friend." And he said, "What about Dr. Ernest Lawrence?" I said, "Well, he's a family friend too, because he's a friend of Loomis's. Anybody a friend of Loomis's is a friend of ours." And so on. And he said, "Well, I'd like those gentlemen to come to see you."
And who was this?
And that was Robert Wood.
Robert Wood was talking.
Yeah, and Robert Wood was a very unusual scientist with a very broad spectrum of things that he understood, chemistry, physics, and so on and so forth, and was a good mathematician as well. And he had a farm in East Hampton. So he knew everybody there, locals and otherwise, and people who just summered there. But he asked if that would be all right, and I said, "Oh, surely." Well, one day when just myself and the maid and my grandfather and the dog were at home in this Mulford house in so-called in Amagansett, there was a knock at the door. And I went to answer the door, and there was Dr. Loomis and there was Dr. Lawrence. And they said, "Could we speak with you and your grandfather?" Now, it was very interesting. They didn't say my mother or father or my sister, because they apparently knew that they weren't there, or my grandmother wasn't there. They had case to join, I guess, or whatever the expression goes. So I, invited them in, and to make a long story a bit shorter, they asked if I might help them. Well, I didn't know how in the world I could help them. And they just said, "Well, if you would do thus and such and so and so, what do you know about atomic weights and things like that?" And I said, "Oh, Grandfather's got some things on it." I said, "No, we can puddle around and see what we find. The great middle class ought to come up with something," I thought. So, we both agreed to help. But they said, "Well, we're really trying to do something in time for a test. It's going to be a test in the desert. And just where it is, we won't say. but we want to know if you can help us figure out certain things about how In the Light was viewed, because
What year was this?
this was 45, and they were right up on top of the date of the time that they needed to have this thing that they were going, this gadget, as they said, called it, a working model. And so the long and short of it is, I took on the responsibility of trying to determine from the evidences that I had what were the atomic weights that applied with 235, 238, 237 rather, and 238 and 239. And so I put the one in front of the other only because it's a made event. But actually, in the order in which I should have them, really, and anybody should have them, it should be 235, 237, 238, 239. Now, the atomic weight as it appears at 239 is, after all, a derived number. Same thing with everything but the 235 in the sense of something that's fissionable. Now, the thing is with the isotopes, 235 is fissionable, 239 is fissionable, but in other words, it has an explosive power. But the 237 and 238 do not. However, all of them are highly radioactive, that's clear. What I needed to do, though, was to figure out how the four were ordered in the formation of what would allow the 235 and the 239 to do their job. And that was what I set about to do. And I actually, we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves, but...
we do that sometimes.
Pardon?
We do that sometimes.
Yes, but I mean, this gentleman here was Alfred Lee Loomis, and that's my mom there, the autist. And these are pictures of, there's also a postcard that was sent from the Store Club, as I remember, to my sister, in which she addresses her as Dear Jenny, which is interesting because that's what I called her more than other people. They usually called her Janine, and it was Ernest Lawrence, and that was the scientist involved. And then there's this book written by the granddaughter of Conant, president of Harvard, that's called Tuxedo Park, and so on. And that, of course, is Loomis there in his younger days, and he was a dashing fellow. Now, why that was important, by the way, my sister has that little inset letter to me on the book that she sent. But and we can talk about that some other time. But the fact remains that his first cousin, older first cousin, something like an older brother and mentor in many ways, was actually Henry Stimson, Secretary of War. So if you're going to begin at the top, you may as well begin at the top. What can I tell you? But what I did was I ordered the things just as they had asked me to. And this was actually the image that I used, in which I took the 7 days and the 7 notes and the 7 metals and organized them according to their atomic weights. And I found that they were in the same order as the alchemists, and everybody had laughed at the alchemists and said, oh, that's poppycock. You know, they couldn't. Well, how do you get 7 out of 7 unless you know the whole entirety of it? Right. I mean, that's impossible. And what about 43? That's a sticky wicket, because 43 is something that was man-made. We didn't have that to something we could go and, you know, get a bush and a rock and move it aside to find 43 in something. No, it was something man-made. As a matter of fact, Ernest Lawrence was involved in that. When he couldn't identify, he sent it to a couple of friends of his. But the fact is that there was the set of images, and there was the item, and of course I then put together, this is actually in, this picture is in many places, but I know it's definitely in Rhodes's book on making the atomic bomb. And I knew 4 out of the 6 leaders. I didn't know Vannevar Bush, I didn't know Conant. I mean, I knew who they were, but I never met them. But Ernest Lawrence is here, Arthur Holly Compton, they used to call him Hollywood, He's the one that gave us the scatter pattern of the X-rays and so on and so forth.
Oh, yeah, right.
Compton effect, and that's his older brother, Carl Compton, who was president of MIT. And then there's Dr. Loomis. Dr. Loomis. Anyway, Dr. Loomis figured very largely this thing, and the other man that was very close to me at a critical point in the study here of what I was asked to do was Dr. Kiszczykowski.
Oh.
And here he is sitting aboard his horse Crisis. And of course he was a former Cossack.
Oh.
So
He can ride.
He can ride, yes, yes. And those are the inner workings that they published, and they published this thing of Klaus Fuchs and his drawings, and of course that was totally phony because those numbers. I mean, the government deleted the numbers, right. But the fact is the numbers would have been meaningless anyway, right. Because literally only I had the correct reading at that time, so I mean the government did what it did usually just to say in effect that it knew this and it knew that and knew the other, but it really wasn't true. What was true was that I did do the image of the event, and this inner one is the distance and the proportion thereof in 6 milliseconds, and then 9 milliseconds later, it again achieves a 180, and that's you notice now that the base is exactly twice the height. So that was what had to be. It had to be a 2-to-1 proportion, just like the music was, and just like the images would seemingly indicate. And of course, what I used for my guide of all of this was what I had originally determined as a child, because I knew that something was wrong with the speed of light.
Okay.
It wasn't 186,000 miles per second. No, it was going from 3 seconds to 1 second. So it would be a double 5. Because you see 584 here on the slant, a double 5, a double 8, a double 4 divided by 3.
Right.
And then you had 186, 281.3 Repeton 3 forever, Trinity forever. Okay. And that was by the way the name of the project. Then you had the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, which is exactly what the Greeks were talking about. But it was putting, the 584s together in their coordinative way. And so I had this image right from the start. And, originally the scientists went, ha, ha, ha. But yet, when you put the information together with the isotopes, it yielded everything they needed to know about the dimensions. And those dimensions were as given. Right there. That's the whole 9 yards. We will present these later on, but the point is, it definitely has a 2-to-1 relationship, and it is built exactly on what I said, the 309, the 842, and so on. By the way, the 272 is something that has been recorded by the Toms, Alexander Tom and his son Archibald, and that 2 is very important. That also is very important because Alexander Tom asked me, he said, well, where does this 272 come from? I can't find any real reason for the origin. I said, oh, it's very simple. It's just 272 is harmonia, or harmony, divided by the 100 of the scale. They said, oh, my goodness. So it's based on the speed of sound at sea level? And I said, absolutely. Of course it is, because it is 1,088 feet per second on average. Average temperature, average sea level, and so on and so forth. And so if you have one for the north, one for the east, one for the south, and one for the west, you've got 272 times 4, which is 1,088. Not only that, but the 1 plus the 8 plus the 8 is 17, and the 1 times the 8 times the 8 times the 1 is 64, and 64 times 17 is 1,088. So it brings it home completely. And I said that that's why this image, and that's the one that stopped the scientist in the East Hampton Library in his tracks. He just had to know. He saw that because there was no desert down here. There was nothing said. So he was just looking at that and he couldn't believe it. And I said, well, this is what happens in 6 milliseconds, as far as I know, and this is what happens in 15 milliseconds. And so there's quite a story connected with all that. But the point is...
Why were you working on that? I mean...
Well, just trying to find out. I was very innocent. I was just trying to find out what the hell the Greeks were talking about.
Uh-huh.
And why was it part of the Iliad and the Odyssey in terms of the way in which it was secretively inserted into the reading of the lines? Why was this done this way? What were the Greeks trying to say? What was the greater thing than the actual recording of the war, which had taken place so long ago?
Uh-huh.
You know, what was behind it? And I always wanted to know. I mean, the kids used to call me in school quite often LCD. And it was for the lowest common denominator, because I was always looking for the core of everything.
Okay.
You know, and it's just, I was made to do that kind of thing. Well, anyway, I did the image, and then what actually transpired was that one could see from the 6 millisecond unit and to the 16, the government did not publish the 15, which I wish they had. And Kishikowski would have liked that, but for some reason they kept it under wraps. But I think it's when the ejector blanket and when the parallax distortion was not quite so destructive, because now the decay was on its way down.
Yeah.
And it becomes very clear over here, for example. But when he checked the monitor through the meterage that was given, he said, "You're spot on. If we had said from the beginning we're going to go along with this, we would have had a less frenetic time in the production of it." And of course, later he regretted very much that we did not invite the enemy, because the Germans had capitulated. I think it was May 7th, was it, or 8th or 9th, something. But anyway, the fact is now we just had Japan in front of us. Why weren't the Japanese scientists who sat cooling their heels in Sweden and Switzerland, why weren't they invited to the test, which is the original intention?
Right.
That's what my grandfather and I were told.
So you felt betrayed when they
Absolutely.
dropped it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that kind of like impacted your life.
Well, the Hiroshima not so much, because all I contributed there was the atomic weight, and of course the speed of light. You know, but the speed of light would not have had such a critical position in that, because it was fissionable on its own. But in the 239, absolutely, it had to be spot on. And so I got all of that right. And the thing is, what was problematical for me was realizing that here they had an opportunity to show what the force would do and not use it.
Yeah.
And that would have read far better in the record than what is and what came from that. And this is not a question of sympathy late in the day for the Japanese or anything of that order. Please don't mistake that coming from me, not from that period of time, because I was very concerned with what was happening in terms of what reports I was given. But it's the fact that it's wrong by the world, because we set a precedent from which there is no coming back. And the fact is,
innocent people being
that's right. That's right. And if you look at the fallout from this, it's very extensive. I think if we had followed the original plan, if they had done what they said they were going to do, I think that we would look at less of an extension of the nuclear club. I think we would not have as many rogue and renegade things occurring, and they certainly would be able to believe us. Because in this situation where this truth has been buried for the whole time, you're out 60 years and you can't even tell the truth about something that happened back there, something's wrong here. Something's very wrong. And I would like to see it told, not because of what I did or had a part of. I'm not trying to look for anything of recognition on that in any way, shape, or form. I simply want the truth told because it needs to be.
So we were being warned by ancient civilizations regarding the splitting of the
Oh,
atom.
we definitely were warned. And we were warned again and again and again. And that Göbekli Tepe, that Potbelly Hill in Turkish, that is a decided warning. In fact, let me just say for the record for the moment, It's Potbelly Hills. That's fine if it fits the Turkish idea. But what it really was called in ancient Greek times, it was called Sling of Seven Arrows. Excuse me, I'm sorry, not 7 arrows, 7 stars.
Uh-huh.
7 stars. I know why I started saying. I was thinking the arrow chain notation, but it's coming from the same source.
Right.
It's the sling of 7 stars. That's the name. That's the proper name. And there's a whole lot more that can be said about that.
So this temple was really a way of communicating to their future, our present,
That's
regarding these
That's right.
these basically what happened. And
Right.
what did they get harmed by having nuclear war? Do you think in a long time ago, or were they
Well,
just too
I'm not
aware of it?
I'm not prepared to say what happened back there because I don't know. All I know is they made a fantastic site, and nobody seemingly has picked up on the fact that it even looks like a sling
Mm-hmm.
in terms of narrow to wide to narrow, which I believe it does. But the other thing is that I think what they were trying to say is what I've said since I was a child: our future is in our past with no escape present, because they not only built it, but then they filled it in. And some of the archaeologists have looked at this and said, well, they didn't know much about structure and so on and so forth, and they had things that would fall over. Well, that's why they filled it in, because they didn't want you tampering with it in the first place.
Right.
But it's an absolutely brilliant design unit, and it has totemic animals in it. And those totemic animals have a lot to say, if you know Greek.
Okay.
And I know what people will say when they hear me say this: oh, the Greek couldn't possibly go back that far.
Uh-huh.
Well, I would remind them something, and that is that Homeros, Homer,
Uh-huh.
that word is still in the modern Greek language unchanged. Douflos, blind, unchanged. What about Alwidos, singer? Well, today it might mean, who am I going to mention? Madonna? But no, it's the chronicler.
Right.
The chronicler. And that singer is the same blind person that might have been around the campfires of, the Greeks and the Trojans going at it. Whatever, telling the accounts of the day and so on, of the wars and so on and so forth. Whatever. But the thing is, we need to hear those voices. Those are the voices, the shamanic voices, that go back century upon century with the clarity of vision that says what's back here relates to what will come if we do not do something about the present we're in.
And when we look at the past, you're saying there's civilizations that were aware of the natural design of the universe.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why they're so brilliant, because they saw
Yeah.
the whole picture.
That's right.
And they were able to be much more advanced than we are today, that
Right.
are fractionated in so many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
That's
Well, we have so many departures, but actually, when one looks at something like this image, one notices right away that you have the prismatic line here, the white being broken into the other things. But it's also a waist thing, which is there, WAIST, to show that there is little in the way of margin of error.
Uh-huh.
And we have stretched that margin of error too many times, and this planet is in one hell of a mess.
That's for sure.
But we're not going to go anywhere soon because of those things we call the Van Allen belts and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And there's so much more to the picture than that.
Well, we'll take a break, and then we'll go
Yes.
into the astronomy.
Yeah, we can do that.
We'll be right back.
Thank you.
All right, Bart, can you go a little bit further in depth about the Trinity Project and the explosion that you made a specific reference to?
Yes, I can. And I really would like to, going back to the figure that I started with, the dove descending. And by the way, when it wasn't a dove, it was also a raven. that was the dark side, for obvious reasons, because the dove is one color more or less, and the raven is quite something different. By the way, it's the smartest bird on the planet, and if anything survives toward the end, it'll be a raven. But that being said, the opposition of colors is the same thing I followed here in the Trinity. They are working the same way, and that's why they reverse, because of course in the heavens that's true also. If you see a supernumerary bow, the colors that are in the order of red, orange, yellow, green, blue are now reversed. Right. And the supernumerary bow above that, if there is one, is reversed again, and the third looks like the first, and the fourth one, and that's very rare to see, I only saw one in my life, will be as the second one is. So that's the way it works. But the point is, with the way in which the explosion was supposed to be conducted, I saw it as the idea, anyway, as the explosion was then followed by implosion and then explosion again. And the reason was it was just like the raindrop, in that you have a refraction, that you have an entrance angle, and then you have the reflection on the back wall, so that's refraction, reflection, and then you have an exit refraction, which a refractory line, which of course is your explosion again. So it's the same idea. Refraction, reflection, refraction, and explosion, implosion, explosion. Same idea. So you follow the same rules of reciprocal resonance in that order. Now, what happened here, and I'm just going to make a very short point about that, I wanted it such that it would be detonated exactly 19,786 seconds after the turn of the hour. In other words, it would now be 5 hours, 29 minutes, and 46 seconds. I read from time to time that it was actually 5:29.45. Well, that was a one way of saying it was 45 seconds after 5:29, but nobody knew for sure. Well, my response to that was very simple. As a child, I said, come on. And I was thinking of, say, the Japanese out in the Pacific or something. You steal eggs from your enemy, believe me, it's time to the second. And you can take the most powerful thing that has ever been detonated on the face of the earth in modern day and say you haven't got it timed to the second when the cameras were set to millisecond? Yeah. Come on, stop it. Say something that makes sense. They were hiding something. Of course they were. And so the perimeter, I wanted to read exactly as millisecond to millimeter. I wanted it to, therefore, when you divide it by 1,000, it would be 529.46, not 0.45, 46. And exactly 180 on top of that would be 709.64. And that's what the outside perimeter is, and that's when it's exactly a 2-to-1 proportion, exactly like the octave is in music. So that was a reciprocal resonance, and that was answering the question that the scientist had asked me for in the beginning, and he had suggested I meet with Lawrence and Loomis, and there was a very good reason for that. He co-authored an article on high frequency with Loomis as the second person writing in 1937, which was the year of my birth. So I figured, oh, well, you know, he's asking me the questions that are related to this article that he wrote in some distant kind of a way, like a kissing cousin that you never see. But anyway, however it goes, I can tell you that it was very disappointing to read that they had now said it was 45 seconds after the 25:29 at 6 milliseconds, and I knew it couldn't be. I knew it couldn't be that time. And I wanted the truth told. And I said I want the dimensions, or the dimensionality of it expressed as well. Well, nobody would play that the way it should be. It's like taking a great work of Bach's or Mozart's or something, and changing the notes. What have you done? Same thing, you take a Stradivarius violin that's geared for one position for A as concert A, and you give it another than the constructor of the violin wanted. So no Stradivarius, with the exception of maybe the Silver Swan or whatever the Russians have, I can't remember. All of them have been altered with longer necks and whatnot, so hardly a Stradivarius is really a Stradivarius today, no matter who has one. They've been made over to accommodate to the higher stringing and so on. And actually, while I'm at it, the so-called A440, where orchestras are tuned frequently, and some want them tuned even higher than that, for the concertmaster, because of these altered instruments capable of that different tension in the thrust. Let me tell you, Mozart sounds very frenetic, more so than it should, and the same thing with Bach and so on. Beethoven would be frenetic anyway. But the point is that what is troubling for me when I had to tune my instrument to what was relative to the A of that period, that would be 399.06. And even as a very small child, my Irish nanny would take me by the wrist and pull me out of the room because of my sister's pump organ having an absolutely atrocious positioning of the A, and she didn't think that it was good for my ear to hear that. And then she would sing it and say, "This is what you should hear," and so on. So very early I was indoctrinated by just the sheer exposure to what was supposed to be right, to appreciate it had to be right, and for what reasons it had to be right, and so on. And this coming from a poor Irish girl who otherwise had to make her own perfume out of the lilies of the valley. I thought to myself, that's something to remember.
Yes.
And so I owed her that debt of actually, nailing down what was the principal frequency of recognition. And she related to Jupiter and say that's in the West. Well, Jupiter was 399 days in synodical revolution, and the West was definitely, as I said, 6. 4, 6, 2, 3, 5 was the standard. So the point was that I knew that the frequency had to be 399.06. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all the Steinways and if all the Stradivari and all the Guarneri, all those great instruments were tuned back to what they were? We might actually hear the music as it was intended, at least in the pre-Beethoven era. In any event, I think that the next question for me was, why did they alter the evidence? And I think it's because they didn't want to take responsibility for the fact that we had a fully controlled, wholly predicted event. This was very unusual because the rule seems to say on the part of the writers, and I'm saying the rule by virtue of copycats, that the Hiroshima bomb was the one we could depend on. No, wrong. It was the one that really was the wild card, was the crapshoot, loose cannon, so to speak. Now, the one we tested, which was the plutonium, there wasn't enough uranium to test a second. There wasn't enough for a second bomb, period. Which is why the Japanese scientists, when they went out and viewed the area of Hiroshima, knew there was nothing else coming at them. Or so they thought they knew, because they didn't realize we had harnessed plutonium. And that's one of the reasons that brought me to the fore when 72.3 pounds of plutonium, this highly radioactive alpha emitter, whereas if it lands on your skin it doesn't do anything, but if you breathe it's going to end your existence over time. Yeah, I looked at that whole thing and I said, the lie apparent is in back in 45. And what do you expect to fall from that? Not a single publication ever dealt with this. And I thought to myself, why? And it's because we don't want to say, even if something is there in the record, like in the ancient record, that allows us to predict correctly and allows us to form correctly, that we're going to take responsibility for doing what we should do by it, because of the fact we don't want anybody dictating to us, especially from the past. because they're not living in the present. Well, the whole point is what you're trying to say is life would be better in the present if you pay attention to it, but of course it doesn't happen that way. And I might terribly misquote Jonathan Swift, writer of Gulliver's Travels, amongst other things, many other things. He said, as universal a practice as lying is, and as easy a one as it seems, I do not remember to have heard in all my conversations 3 good lies, even by those most celebrated in the faculty or art, or however he ends the statement. But the point is, he's absolutely right, because lies are everywhere. And the point is, what about when they don't have to be? I mean, some people lie even when they don't have to, just so they can stay in practice. And I think that's possibly given often to lawyers and politicians, but is there a difference? I don't know. It seems to me many lawyers are politicians and vice versa. I do know, as I look at the Congress and the Senate, that these people have an activity which sits on they sit on their hands, which is bad for their circulation. But in any regard, what president, anywhere, anytime, what party could possibly do more than has been done damage-wise to the fate of the country and the state of the country than somewhere wherein they're just being abrasive and obstructive for no other purpose than just to get in the way. I don't know how to put it, but it was the same thing back there in the Second World War. I saw some people who were obstructive within the science community right up in your face. And then I saw others that said, no, we're going to do this according to the plan we have. But in the end, when the plan doesn't come to the fruition that it should, things are set in motion that forever plague you thereafter. And I think that's a lot of what is bothersome to me now. I remember saying to Dr. Kiszczykowski that we needed to take aim. And I didn't know at that time that what I meant by that. I meant it was the academic industrial complex, but with a difference here, because it was the idea that it was not just the industrial complex, but it was the and the military that followed. The academic was the place where we got the scientists from. Mm-hmm. So that's why I said take aim, because I mean we had a détente situation here, and I said no, it's the academic industrial military. Well, however that got read down the line, and of course Kiszczykowski was Eisenhower's chief scientific advisor. However it got read down the line, the academic was out of the picture. Now they just talked about the industrial military complex. And I didn't use the word complex, but I used something that was very similar. But I did say this because I felt that academia had come to the fore in terms of providing the wonderful scientific minds that were able to put the test forward. But when the test became not just a test of an event that people could have been invited to, and believe me, it was so awe-inspiring that it would have been capitulation without waiting for the event to actually take place. I think that it strikes me that we're in the same spot today, because we talk about doing things like weaponizing space, and that's quite literally impossible to be reliable. We talk about terraforming Mars, and I must have champed at the bit I don't know how many times out there in NASA land, in effect telling them, look, stop this. You're just wasting your time because it can't be done. And I know that I earned myself some bad points because I was so hard in the subject. I just said it's not possible to do, and don't even consider it. Don't put any more money and time into this because it's just bogus, and so on. And I got into trouble for that. But I remember a very senior reporter from the Boston Globe, I believe, I recall that, asking me about the thing about the moon, because he knew I'd had doings with Mariner and with Viking 1 in particular, but also later Voyager 2, but that wasn't the question at the time because Voyager 2 hadn't left the launch pad. But he said to me, if there was this matter of the synchronicity that was demanded for when you not just drop something down on the planet, but you pick it up, how could they do that? I mean, who did it? How could they do that without certain capacity to make these determinations on a very critical level? And you have said that if you didn't have a cesium clock aboard, not only the space craft that dropped the thing, but also with a pickup vehicle, if you didn't have it on both, you couldn't time it.
Right.
And I said, yeah, well, that's foregone conclusion. He said, but nobody else is saying that. And I said, well, I'm sorry. It's just obvious. You want to pick something up when you go by Boston again and you find yourself over Washington with a blink of an eye. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
because of course it's silly to say such things. We had a reason to look at what there was in the way of guidance that had been overturned or had been set aside, and did we want to continue to make this kind of a mistake? What was it? What was the motivation here? And I think that what I was trying to do was to understand what we needed to have as exemplary of good determinations from the past that would mean something to us in terms of the contemporaneity in antiquity. That's what I was trying to look at. And I was finding myself thwarted time and time again. And as I say, one of the Boston Globe, I believe it was, reporter said to me, well, if you didn't do, in effect he said, if you didn't do this thing with the synchronicity in terms of the moon and going to the moon and whatnot, who did? And I said, well, they were missions by Merlin, of course. I mean, I don't know. Who could have done it? Because it is not an easy thing to do. And of course, he then, being a reporter, he was, being a bit pushy and aggressive and whatnot, which is what they're supposed to be. And he said, well, if you didn't do it, who did it? And I said, well, I don't know. But I said, one thing I can tell you, that the statement of what could happen or should happen would be absolutely impossible under the circumstances they even claim that they did, because you can't even get into orbit in that length of time, let alone go out there and return. I mean, that's absurd.
And land.
Yeah,
and launch.
sure. And I said all of these things. I said, but the thing is, you ought to be able to characterize that in a way in which people can get it. You say, I'm leaving that to you. Characterize the whole Apollo and Gemini in one word. And I thought about it for a split second, and then I said, moondoggle. And in other words, taking boondoggle and putting moon. And he said, may I, use that? And I said, yeah, but just don't apply my name to it. And I did. I remember talking to you about that.
Yes.
at a certain point. And then somebody, you said, wrote an article with that title or something.
Yeah, wagging the moondoggle, or. But you mentioned that you spoke to some colleagues at NASA, and they claimed too that they didn't believe it, but they can't talk about it.
That's right. They did. They dummied up, and I knew that certain people in the Mars program had dummied up about certain things there, the terraforming and so on and so forth. They knew it was a piece of nonsense. But I guess when I was out in Pasadena, one of the things I remember saying, I shouldn't have said anything because I always got in trouble every time I opened my mouth. But I thought, well, I have the freedom of being a musician and away from things. I've never taken a penny for anything I've ever done academically. And that includes tutoring kids and stuff at the university over here, because I guest lectured in 5 different departments over there. I think that's something of a record, although I didn't mean it to be that. I just was filling a need. But anyway, I remember in that regard saying to a collection of them out there, I thought of them as the Pasadena Preppies. Now that wasn't very nice. That's the way I tended to think of them. And I said, we all know that pigs can't fly, but pork barrels can.
Yeah.
And that sort of did the rounds, the fact that I had said that. And so when one of the auditors for NASA was going over what it was that I saved of the government's money and all of that kind of stuff connected with these phony projects, he said something about the amounts of money that were involved, and I said, look, I just did what any responsible science person would do. I called attention to the fact that this was not tenable, it was not possible, so why even bother with it? And certainly why generate false stories concerning it. And so...
Can I ask you what you what your role with NASA, what your projects were, and what your accomplishments were there? And because I find that incredibly fascinating, especially your contribution with this Cydonia region.
Well, I did do an awful lot of, how does one put it, probing into what possibilities there would be, but I definitely had some targets in mind, and one of them was the Cydonian region, wherein I said that certain things would be found. And I knew where one of them would have to be found if one started in the right place to roll the camera, so to speak.
Right.
And I said the particular picture that I want to have you be as close to 90 to the ground as possible. And it turned out that it was 89, which is pretty damn good. Because there's pitch and yaw on every sea, and that includes the cosmic one as well.
Right.
But I wanted to be able to see in the top end of the frame, and by the way, that's with the fact that you do want to have a starting point from which to then develop your and coordinate your calculations against the zigzag aspect of the original cameras, because they had this back and forth thing that later the slant cuts that were made did not follow, and that had to be too much with computer development. I prefer the frame by frame thing, much prefer it. But the point was that I had said that in this particular case there will be a 5-sided pyramid facing north, and there will be a face up in this corner, and the 5-sided pyramid will be here, and then the face is in this corner, and then you go down here and there'll be a breast-shaped mound. There's another one over here, but the important point is you will have a perfect gamma form, or an L upside down L, for example, and backward. And it should be parallel to the frame. It should be parallel to the frame. Now, they thought I was crackers. They thought it couldn't be done. I said, well, if you just follow what I'm telling you, it will be. And they said, well, what's the point reference for the pyramid? I said, it's 40.87 north. And they said, but how could you possibly know that? And I said, well, again, I'm going to answer you the same way I've answered students in the university when they've said, how is it that shamans, or in this case, Amanamas, could determine these things? And I said, well, shamans may need glasses, but they don't need telescopes. And I said, it's one of these things wherein you get the transmission, and if you have faith in the fact that there is a channel or a conduit or whatever is the dialogue that seemingly describes this, although nothing is quite adequate to the experience itself, I said, then you trust what you're getting. Now, 40.87, all you have to do is multiply that times the 100, which is in the Greek scale, and it's 40.87. Okay, so if it's 5 north, then the 5 times the 40.87 is 20,435, which is exactly the combination of 5,820 miles for the distance of Phobos to the center of Mars, and Deimos at 14,615 miles. And it's absolutely, that is the case. Well, they wanted to know, well, did I have anything in publication that said that? And I said, well, not that I've taken credit for it, but actually there's a statistical box in the Britannica that runs from, I think, 66 to 73.
67 to 73.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Well, whatever it is, it's there, and my measurements that were given to the older writer were incorporated in that article.
Right.
And then it got changed, and I won't go into that because it was nasty business. But the fact remains that those measurements were there, and also what was there was the total of the kilometers, because I insisted on, if you're going to publish the one, you're going to publish the other. Because a lot of these people, when they do these calculations between kilometer and mile, they can't find their... It's a good thing that they have something there to calculate it for them, because I think they couldn't find their way to Grandma's house unless they could smell the cookies in the window or something. I mean, it's just... the GPS is great stuff,
Yeah.
but it had to start with something else.
Right.
And so that's where I was with that. And I said that it will be at this distance because the fact is that the kilometer distance is 32886. Now, if you were enterprising enough to do the Homeric thing, you would take the 32886 and take away the 2435, and what would you have? You'd have 12,451. Well, that's exactly half of 24,902, which is the equatorial circumference of Earth.
Wow.
I waited for years for somebody to find that on their own,
Yeah.
and I've been disappointed ever since.
Yeah.
Nobody has even thought about it, and I think that's tragic.
And you actually traveled around the Earth under orders of General LeMay to prove the circumference of the ancient measures.
Yes, I did.
With a couple of top-notch surveyors.
Yeah.
And now
They
let's
were
get to the pyramids. And
They were career military guys, by the way. I wasn't.
Okay, and bring us to the newest pyramid. The largest pyramid on Earth was recently found, I think, in 2012.
Well, I don't know that much about that one. I've just read a couple of things that you provided me with, but I did not get anything on that particular thing. The only thing I spotted that would relate to what I've done, and was always looking for where it might be, was the one where they mentioned having a ceramic which was 800 kilograms.
Right.
Well, now, that's a pretty fair piece of weight to deal with. You didn't just get that and put it on your back and walk in with it.
And this is the area that was carbon dated about 10 to 12,000 years ago.
Whatever it is.
Well, the 25,000 year was the Bosnian pyramid, right?
Whatever it is, I have to still. I think they called it K2 monument. It's a high focus piece.
Yeah.
But what I really want to know is it 800 or is it 812 or is it 749 or something? You know, I want to know exactly, because if it is 800, then it is the Omega kilogram piece that I had received information on as a young person.
Fascinating.
And it may be. Now, as far as the Göbekli Tepe, as I said, I've already told you that. It's the one which is called, in Greek, the name of it really is Sling of Seven Stars. Sling of the Seven Stars. Now, the fact remains that there are totemic annals with that, but there's also a location with the original calculation.
Right.
And that location is dead on the mark. Absolutely, clearly dead on the mark. The problem is that we don't know where that mark is. Because we are looking at, in all these ancient sites, we're looking at Greenwich as the 0 point, or if you will, the point where east meets west, and
Meridian.
Meridian, the prime meridian, and of course, that is not the case. The prime meridian, and probably going back to Paleolithic times, I wouldn't be a bit surprised at that at all. Certainly would affect the reading that they gave these other sites that have been decidedly Upper Paleolithic. So I think they're unitized to the degree that the Neolithic sites are, and more so.
Uh-huh.
But in any event, what I would say about that is that what gives it away is there's a particular town in England which is exactly 1 degree east from the I'll state it the other way around. Greenwich is east of the place it should be in terms of wherein it had to be. But if the good king and his horse had managed to go 1 full degree to this little tiny town, I think the official census back in 2011 or something like that was, or whatever it was something like 727 people. But there is a notable person, and more than one actually, but very notable to most people, who comes from there, and that little town. And that town is called Nettlebed. Nettlebed. And nobody really knows the origin of how in that name came to be.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you knew its function in the early times, you would know that it was cited by the Greeks as Knide Klene, which is directly nettle bed.
Uh-huh.
And the thing about that is that's the prime meridian. And it has certain features to it that would have, I think, excited the Toms, Alexander and our Sandy Tom and his son, if they had gotten over there to really look at the situation over. I tried to encourage them several times, but they already had things on their agenda. And besides, there are academic avenues that one normally encounters in these things in terms of who wants what and you're on a list kind of thing. So Nettlebed didn't seem very important. But one notable who comes from there is very well known, Ian Fleming.
Mm-hmm.
I think that down the road he might be contacted and asked if he wants to look into this because he's a good investigator. Of course, he'd probably be unwilling to do that because it's like the home ground. And what do you mean? You mean I've been here since the Upper Paleolithic? Well, anyway, no, I don't know how he'll view it. But I think that what's interesting about it is that it also ties together with a little tiny mountain, which is actually an oversized hill. You would pile 3 on top of each other and then have 183 feet to go, or roughly that, in the height of Mount Washington at 6,288. Because the hill is 2035 and pocket change, although the reportage I think says 2034. Now I went over there to measure it, and this was something that LeMay did not ask me to do, but we're going to deal with that first. I was already with having done Teotihuacan, so and I was awaiting something else, but I was at a little base up in North Yorkshire, amongst Baltimore by name, and there was a wing commander there amongst the British. That's like a bird colonel for us, in terms of the American forces. And I had good relations with the guy. So I asked him, I said, can you get some aerials for me of the Isle of Man? And he said, what are you up to? And I said, no good, of course, but I want to know if I can get a position for Snæfell. It's a mountain that actually has an Icelandic name to it, and there's a mountain in Iceland that has that that same name. But I said it was known sort of to the residents as Harmony Hill, and there's a charming story behind that whole thing. But in any event, which again my Irish nanny told me, which is one of the things I go back to. Anyway, this is where the Manx cat has the short tail and so on and so forth. I won't go into the story, but it kind of catches the mind of a young person when they come up with stuff like that. So anyway, and again, it's where a legend actually means something.
Yes.
Like, here in the Northeast, for example, some of the Western archaeologists and anthropologists were laughing at the fact, well, how can you believe anything that the Eastern Indians say when they have some guy, Glooskap, paddling around in a stone canoe? And I said, well, yeah, but a stone canoe would sink, right? And they said, yeah, that's why we're laughing. And I said, yeah, but where do the oars come to make the steel ships that go just fine across the ocean? Don't be so quick to judge. Anyway, I said that it was interesting because this little mountain, as it turns out, was a high focal point which had to be looked at in the correct reading of the difference between where Greenwich is and where the prime meridian was, which is 1 full degree over, and that's that little tiny town that nobody ever heard of unless they lived there. and that's nettle bed. But it has its name in Greek, and that's where the name comes from. And who kept that up, aside from the Greeks who went to that part of the world to look for tin and stuff like that, as did the Romans who followed them. That name has been in place all that time. And I think it's remarkable that they kept it in place and gave it direct translation. Direct translation. Couldn't be more direct if you tried. Now, that's number one. Number two, when you look at the position of this mountain, and you look what is brought against it in the equation, it's staggering. Because it means even the smallest detail, if it fit the mode of telling you something about where you were and where positions were necessary to record because of the fact that they were special in themselves, then you say, well, then they had to know the globe entire. It's that strikes you, that makes you realize this whole latitude, longitude thing is up in smoke, because obviously they do. And it's we who turn around and say, no, they didn't. And we do a lot of this based on the fact that we're still using Greenwich as the point to make the reckoning, and that's not what should happen, any more than it should for Göbekli Tepe. It is not the degree, it's not where they say it is, it's 1 degree over from where they say it is. Now, I saw this thing in its entirety in the equation, replete with the totemic animals in place, when I was just a child. I drew it up, and eventually we will put that up on the website. I'm not prepared to do it right now because I think the Greek has to be explained in fuller detail. But it's there, and it's every bit as important as anything else that has come our way, because it is a site which I think comments on the atamota aspect of what I found as a child. Because I was guided, and I told these scientists this back in '45. I said, you have the term atom from atomos, yes, you have that, meaning small particle, very small particle, but it also means in the context of indivisible. However, I disagreed with that, because I said it doesn't stop there. It's not that it's indivisible, it's not to be divided.
Right.
That's what I said. Now, my grandfather did not balk when I said that. He said, that's very interesting. What's on the other side of that? And I said, mota. But the word doesn't it doesn't appear in Greek in any way. And he said, no, but it does in Semitic. Mot does in one form or another, and it means death. So atom, in a sense, would mean life, and mota, death. Well, there's a reciprocal resonance there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that encouraged me, because then I said to the scientists, all right, well, if both of them are 411 in Greek, in terms of the value of the letters, because that one has to follow the other, then there must be a square form of that, which relates to the very thing that we are making as an abuse of the light. And at first they rejected it. However, Robert Wood, I have to admit, did not. He said, it's a very compelling story you're telling, because I know that it falls within the conceived or conceived range, sorry for the improper word, the conceived range of the human voice, and therefore is it a cry for help. Very astute observation, very astute observation. And I was just so thrilled to hear this man of this incredible knowledge see that there was something there to pay attention to. And I just wish he had communicated that to Lawrence and Lewis. He did not. I learned about it later from Kosciuszko. He said, but he did tell me. It was 2 years later. He said, but he did tell me, and he said, I thought that child was almost like an oracle. I know he doesn't view himself that way, but he said, that's the way I thought of him. And he said, but whatever is oracular in his disclosures is really coming from outside of himself.
Yeah.
And all he wants to do is let the world use what there is of it to better the circumstances that we are in. And I can't imagine a better use. And he doesn't really want, he told Kishikowski, he said he doesn't want authorship of any of this. He just wants it to be recognized that it's there. And that's why he feels very strongly about denying, and he does that readily enough, that he has much to do anything with it, except he says, don't shoot the messenger. He's always saying that. And that's what he's up against. People quite prepared to shoot the messenger.
Yeah, I know that for sure.
Yeah, and you know that very well. You can relate to that just fine. Now, as far as Kishikowski is concerned, that's another history for another time, really. But I will say this much about the man. Of all the scientists I had to deal with, I never knew anything other than the kindness, the concern, the rational unfolding of argumentation one way or the other from Kishikowski. In the beginning it was sort of that way with Lawrence, but as time went on, Lawrence and I began to lock horns a bit, because he was a study in bombast when he wasn't being affable, laughable Lawrence. Most of the time he was that way. Yeah. And he really was legitimate in his answer to my sister when she asked him one day, she said, how come you men, you're our father's age, and what are you talking to my little brother about? You're out in the sandbox for an hour or two at a time, back of Loomis's house, this is after the war. Yeah. And you're just, or up on the beach, you do the same thing. He's just a little boy. What, and my sister couldn't put it together. And Lawrence finally gave her an answer that she could live with. He said, he reminds me of me when I was a child. Which was true. Most people don't know this about Ernest Lawrence. They don't know it at all. He had a very avid interest in astronomy. And almost the temper, or whatever, world that he got into in terms of what he got the Nobel Prize for, the cyclotron, he almost didn't go there. Mm-hmm. He almost stayed with astronomy. And I don't know what exactly turned his mind in the other direction, but he definitely had a feeling for it. Now, at the same time, he hated long equations. He hated complex math, is what he saw. And when I came to him with the correct relationship between the images, which I had up there earlier, he sent me away. He said, it's too involved. I come back with something simpler. So I said, but Dr. Lawrence, it's third grade math. And he said, I don't care. Simplify it. So I did. I came back with something, and he felt it was too simple. And so I said, but Dr. Lawrence, it's third grade math. And he said, do it again. So come back with something halfway in between. So I came back this time, and I thought surely this was going to win the day. And he said, it's still not quite right. Do it again. I said, Dr. Lawrence, it's third grade math. And then I got saucy. I said, maybe I should wait until I'm in the third grade to explain it to you. Because I was in the second grade.
Where is that diagram that you mentioned? Because like to know.
I don't know. I had it here somewhere.
Well, you can look for it, because then I can scan it and put it into the...
it's right here.
Okay, that's the one.
Yeah, but I mean...
So I know.
Yes, that's the one. Okay. And you can take that with you, actually.
Yeah, I want all of them.
I got, well, you may not get all of them just yet, but...
I'll mail them back to you.
But the thing is that what I did do was I pointed out the fact that there was every reason to believe that if we followed directly what I was saying, there wouldn't be a problem. I said, I don't know why you insist on looking for a problem when you don't have to. Sometimes I could, for an 8-year-old kid, I could be pretty sharp-tongued.
Precocious.
But, I don't know about that, but I can tell you that this is a picture actually from the third grade in my school, because I was taken, imagine naming the thing Trinity. Now, I was whipped out of the school by the direction, or under the in effect, demand by Alfred Loomis. Yes. And he was a trustee of the school. And his 2 stepsons went to that school. But this is the school that I was in, which was Trinity School in New York. And what there is in this picture, it's kind of hard to show it on the camera, I won't even try. But right up here is the little boy that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And you may notice that the dress code is shirt, tie, and school blazer. Right. And gray trousers and so on, or in this case, I think shorts we had at this season. But the fact remains the dress code was rigorous. Nobody disobeyed it. So I came to school without any tie.
Okay.
And then my friend Larry, and I was the teacher's pest. And the S from the P, E, and to the T is probably all the S I gave her over certain things. And so I was the class pest in her mind. And here she's sitting there with a very, I think, disgruntled face, very down at the mouth, because we had practiced this the day before, but of course I had the full regalia at that time. And my friend Larry Waterbury, who's down here, I went up to him and I said, Larry, I want you to, he was one of my best friends, and I said, I want you to take off your tie. He said, you want me to do what? And I said, take off your tie and let me arrange your collar. He said, I may be your best friend, but I think you're sending me to my execution or something, you know, to the guillotine. And I said, well, let's try it. So he put his tie under a couple of coats that weren't even his own in the cloakroom, so they wouldn't be found, or it wouldn't be found. And then I opened up his collar like this, wide open. So here it was known, just a little bit of color showing. But here there was, but the point was you had no tie in either case. So if you look at the angle, and I was judging the brickwork behind, with stonework of the school, but you look at the angle from here down to here, and then the ground line where the benches are and whatnot, I approximated pretty accurately, actually, 121 degrees here. Now what was in my mind was it was the 121st Psalm, which says, I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. My help cometh even from the Lord who hath made heaven and earth, and so on. Well, I needed help, all right. So I said 121 from 360 leaves 239. I wanted it on record that I was leaving the school because I was forced to. So the 239 is here, in this wedge you see here. But the 129 is here. 121 rather is here. Now, the point that I was trying to make was the following. When I asked the photographer to do what he did, and boy, there was almost a firefight at the scene at the time, and I just said, no, that's the way it's going to be. And I even told my friend Alan Lenzler over here to move over, and I was going to take his place, because the day before we had posed where I was on the outside, and he was now, and I said, hunch down a little bit. So he did. Of course, he looks a little shorter than he should have. But the thing is, it was interesting because the boys did what I wanted, despite what the masters were saying. And so I was pretty popular, really. Anyway, the point was that they did it. And here we had this immutable picture. And what I can tell you from that was that when school, you know, it was went into the school yearbook, obviously, but when I was at the point where I could ask the photographer, I said, can I have 6 extra copies of this? And he said, 6? What are you going to do with them? I said, that's for me to figure out, but the point is, can I have them? And what's the price? And he said, for you, nothing. So he gave me all 6. And I was shocked because I expected to pay at least $1 or something, you know, whatever it was. And he wouldn't take anything from me. He said, you're a very interesting little kid. I've never seen anybody defy the rules this way and get away with it. So I got my 6 photographs and I went home with the understanding that pretty soon we'd be out of school. And when we went out to the island, I went to Dr. Loomis's place. I waited a week or 2, I can't remember, and I came right in and I put it on what amounted to a magazine, like a music stand, but it was for reading, you know, a magazine or something. I put it right there, and I turned right around and walked out without saying a word to Dr. Loomis. I mean, he was there, And he looked at me. He couldn't figure out, why didn't I greet him? Why didn't I do? I mean, I said hello to his second wife in the kitchen as I came through, because I came through the back door, knowing that I would surprise him because I'd come in from behind. And so I put the thing there. It didn't say a word, and he couldn't figure it out. And what it was my saying, no ties to Trinity. No ties to Trinity.
Yeah.
In other words, you didn't need to do this. I would keep my mouth shut. I would do the things I needed to do. Yeah. And I failed courses deliberately, like things I was good at, you know. I mean, math. Yeah. I failed Latin. I mean, can you imagine me failing Latin? I mean, my God.
Because they wanted you to stay, unknown.
That's right. And so I deliberately failed courses. My sister cannot understand this to this day. She said, how could you, when you were so capable and so brilliant, how could you possibly do that to yourself? And I said, because I was keeping everybody safe. You see, what people don't realize is that Dr. Loomis had one face to the world, basically, but he had another. He had a very dark side. And he marched into the room where I had finished the drawings in early summer '45, in time for the test. And, you know, whatever changes they had to make in order to meet that test. I did that in the room that was in the library, which was the study actually devoted to Pennypacker, who wrote General Washington's Spies in New York and on Long Island, amongst other things that he wrote. But that was one of them. And his wife was the chief librarian of the East Hampton Library. So I completed it in those drawings in his study. And one day, Loomis walked over. This was after the Manhattan Project had taken place. Not the whole project, but after the test had taken place. Because that was July 16 in the morning, at, as I said, 5:29 and 46 seconds. The thing was, Loomis walked in, and I don't know to this day exactly what transpired, but I know that Pennypacker was called out of the room by his wife, and supposedly, as best I remember, answering a phone call that came in. But why him, I don't know, because she answered most everything. Why was he necessary to? And he even came back with a very frustrated look on his face. And I shouldn't even mention it because I couldn't really remember what I thought about at the time, except Dr. Loomis at that point in time took the very magnifying glass that I had, that I did the work with, because I had to work with magnifying glass, and he put deep etched lines, scratched it out. And he said to me that he was going to scratch my eyes out if anything got it. And he said that, or if it's bad enough, something like that. I can't remember those words he said. Those words I remember. He said, you and your family, not you or your family, but you and your family will meet with a terminal accident. And he meant it. If he didn't mean it, he shouldn't have said it, because I certainly took it as if he meant it.
And he was a founder of the Rand Corporation?
Oh, that too, yes, he was. He was the founder. It was his money that bankrolled the Rand Corporation, and he was his first trustee. Supposedly very reluctant to be, and so on and so forth, and maybe he was, because he didn't like public focus on things that showed a dark side.
Right.
And he was very good at masking it.
I see.
But to me, he looked like the devil incarnate. I thought of him, in fact, my mother commented one night at the dinner table, I remember this very well, in East Hampton. She said, now, your sister calls him Uncle Alfred. Most people call him Uncle Alfred, who are of the younger set. Whereas you always call him Dr. Loomis. Why? And I said, because that's the way I see him, as Dr. Loomis. I don't see him any other way. And Mother said, in effect, you're evading or dodging my question or whatever. And I said, no, I'm not. I just don't see him any other way. And she said, oh, yes, you do. And you're not telling us why. And I said, well, I think he has a dark side. Something that some people don't see, but I have had reason to know exists. And so she persisted, and she said, well, I want you to call him Uncle Alfred. I said, Mother, if I were to call him anything, it would be Tio Diablo or Tio Mephisto, Mephistopheles, in other words, Mephisto. And she said, I don't think that's funny. And I said, well, it may not be funny, but I can give you what you demand up to a point. But then, I'm sorry, you're my mother, I love you, but your friends are your friends, so you go ahead, have your friends. And years later, I was thinking about the fact that, this NASA auditor I told you said I had saved all this money and so on and so forth. And he said, you have friends in high places. And I said, yes, but I have enemies across the hall. And that's exactly the way, and that comes from a deep resentment that I had for people who, were wearing masks. Because that's a form of lying. That's a form of lying. And Loomis definitely wore masks. But, I think somebody should have figured it out. In fact, many people did. Because he was married. He had a wife. And the thing was, she was aging. And he didn't care for that too much. There were problems with aging, as one knows. But he settled on the wife of a younger scientist that he had had at Tuxedo Park and whatnot. And even the second son of Mr. Hobart, who was a scientist in his own right, but he was interested in astronomy also as an amateur subject. And his wife was Minette. And of course, I thought of her, I'm not sure I should be saying this on camera, but I thought of her as Minette the coquette. I did not particularly shine to her. But in any event, he goes after he goes after her and ditches his wife, in effect, wants to put her in a sanitarium or some such place. And he proceeded to do things that were, bringing censure his way. And I remember one in particular that was very funny. I was always doing things entrepreneurially, and my family were very upset about that. Because in that community, the rich kids weren't supposed to be doing things. Well, I had my own mowing machine, and I had my hedge cutting, and I had my gardening thing I did, and so on. And it was good because it allowed me to get around to see people, and a lot of these people were very important people. Mm. So anyway, I was at the Maidstone Club, which is, a very high pollutant membership thing and so on. But I was taking and opening cherry stones and little necks, clams, for the residents and the members. And I was doing it for Mr. Warner, who had this fish concession at the Maidstone. Well, I came down there to work on them, and as I was working, I noticed something. I said, the beach umbrellas, some are facing in a way that's going to shield them from the sun, and the others are wide open to the sun because they've got this thing going right down in a colonnade, almost with military accuracy, so that you look down and all you saw was these beach umbrellas facing in toward each other. Mm. And right at the center was the lifeguard, so you could see all the way down. You could gun sight all the way down from the swimming pool. Well, I was mystified as to what would cause anybody to do that. Why would you not use the beach umbrella to guard against the sun? And so, well, Mr. Loomis and his new wife were expected. So down they came, and oh yes, they went down. Nobody said word one to them, and nobody greeted them except I think the lifeguard did at the end of the line. But they were being shunned. They were being ostracized. And these are also very wealthy people and very, in the world of importance and so on and so forth. So they were letting him know that they weren't going to look at him and his new wife and so on and so forth. But I didn't get it. So this little gal who had the keys and other things to the bathhouses and whatnot, Mary, she had freckles all over her Celtic face, a wonderful little old gal. She put me wise, and I started laughing, and I almost dropped the plate of cherry stones that I had to deliver. I couldn't contain myself. I was just, and I thought, serves them right, But anyway, that being said,
I'd like to close on a different note because we haven't accomplished. I haven't accomplished much in a lot of my campaigns, and you said that because of our work against the Cassini Earth flyby, there was a major shift in the foreign policy of Russia delivering uranium to the U.S.
Oh well, yes, there was that. Let me just finish up with what I was saying, though. Because I don't like to cut the end of the story.
Okay.
But it really was a case where I had to find out who was the guy or guys behind the doing of this, because it was pretty audacious.
Yeah.
And I finally asked Mary. I said, "All right, I'm in a quandary. Who was it?" She said, "Captain Flood," and he was a very wealthy Canadian policeman, RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Mm-hmm. And he was the ringleader. And apparently you put this thing together. No wonder it had the military precision of the awnings and these beach umbrellas, rather, not awnings. And so I asked him about it. He said, "Well, that school you're going to, I know all about it. Being shunted up there into Massachusetts, how terrible." He said, "I'll tell you what. You like the RCMP manuals, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do, very much. I always learn wonderful things from them, because they have a broad range of topics and all kinds of scientific data and so on." And so he said, "I'll make sure I'm going to send you one every time they're published." And he kept his word.
Wow.
But I told myself, there's a lesson in all this. Don't ever step out of line to that degree, because you are going to be found out in one form or another. And if they could do this to Loomis,
But that was based on him going with the younger woman. And
Yeah.
But they weren't doing that because of all the other things that you knew about.
No, not at all.
Okay,
not
that's
at all.
why I was going on to another topic.
But it was something that I couldn't go forward with what I had.
Yeah.
But I wanted to see that at least some people could make a judgment on their own that he had this dark side.
There's always a cosmic balance to the
Yeah.
to
There was a cosmic correction
Yeah.
in place. Okay, now as to your question, want to repeat that so we get back on track?
Yep. And again, I have editing skills, so you
Yeah.
probably won't even see the interruption in the final cut.
Okay.
But I wanted to ask you, what came out of Cassini with our work?
Well, this was an amazing result, because, as you know, if you read everything that I put there, it was like, we've got all this. We've done all these things, and isn't this wonderful that we've got this, and so on and so forth. I mean, I was trying to be positive about the thing, and I didn't do anything except at the very end. I think I said something about, in bold black letters, "Do not do this again."
Yes.
I think I said that.
Yes.
But I know that what happened was the following, and I
Something
did
about in the face of God or the light.
Oh yeah.
Abuse.
Yes. It was a slap in the face of God, as far as I was concerned, or whatever. It was abuse of the light and the whole 9 yards.
And that's based on all the number systems and
Right.
all that you learned from the languages.
Yes, and since I had done things that reflected the good things NASA could do, because basically, we should have gotten in on the ground floor. We did, as a matter of fact. I remember we were still searching for a name for the agency, and I had suggested, facetiously, of course, the Rogers and Gordon Space Agency, and people looked at me. I remember in this tete-a-tete. I said, "Well, what about that?" And I said, "Well, you have Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, and that's what I think." And so, I mean, I got my little innings on that one, but basically, I was upset because I saw that there was wrongful use of stuff, and then when you came with the Cassini. When I was living on 6th Street, I had seen, I don't know if I told you that part, I had seen some reviewing papers of the intention of doing this or that. I didn't see anything about gravity assist. I didn't see anything there. As far as I knew, it was going to leave the launch pad and go on its way, take longer to get there, to Saturn, whatever, but it was still going to happen. But the Glory Boys got calculating, and they decided, we're going to have a gravity assist, a slingshot effect. From use of the, and we wouldn't go around Venus once, but twice. I mean, it was bizarre.
Yes.
And so I remember I wrote what I did for you, but in the meantime, I got on the phone with some people that I knew through channels, and I said, at least get them to have the spacecraft clear the Earth by going at a greater distance. They'll still have plenty of time to make up. What they need to do, but meanwhile, get it a little further out. Gives us more of a chance. Hopefully, God will wink at the event. and that's what I used as a basis. Well, the truth of the matter is that something on that order did happen. I never got a report back as to how far, and what was the line of tide that they might have been captured by or whatever. I didn't get that back, so I didn't proceed any further. But I do remember that one day I got a call from the Department of Energy, and I was flabbergasted. I thought, well, what are they calling me for? I don't have any truck with these people. And the scientist on the other end said, well, you wrote something about this Cassini project. And I said, yeah, what I wrote was just very simple. I mean, why is this? To what do I owe the honor of this call or something? I said. He said, well, the Russians have shut off the plutonium pump in effect. I said, well, yeah, but what's that got to do with me? He said, because of what you wrote. I said, but I can't believe that. I didn't write anything that was indemnifying, really, except I just said, don't do this again. He said, well, they're not going to let NASA do it again. And you're responsible for that in a certain way. And I said, oh, well, tell me more, because at this time I realized I was trapped into whatever, and I didn't realize that it should be. But anyway, he said, well, we're trying to figure out what should we do with NASA. Because, we hold the keys to the pump kind of thing with what we have. And so I said, oh, I know what I would do. I'd hold public hearings. And I'd hold them all over the country and tell them what sort of Damocles hung over their head with NASA's betrayal of their trust, because they have plenty of astrophysicists who know better than what's being done here.
Yes.
It doesn't take me. Any one of them could furnish the same information, if not more, because it's not my field.
Dr. Goffman did a wonderful letter of
yes, he did.
Interest, and
yeah,
and just claimed that once it's inside your body and that going at the speeds of a flyby, that plutonium would be real devastating to our planet, like Fukushima is and other situations is now.
That's exactly right. And the thing is, as I say, an alpha emitter, something that lands on your skin, I don't want to make that point too many times. I think there are plenty of people that make it. Yeah. It doesn't do any harm, but you breathe. Yeah. Anything you breathe is going to be, so within a generation and a half, wiped out. Yeah. Whatever, however long it takes. It's hard to know. Yeah. Hard to know those things because we don't have proper data on that. It really tells us.
Yeah, we have antioxidants that help us deal with the formation of the cancer cells.
Yeah, but we don't have really an adequate understanding of what this would happen with an umbrella over the general.
We're getting close to finding out.
Well, we're well. I don't want to go there. Anyway, I think that it was a shock to me that my article had in any way been a point of interest, and they said it had been. So I said, well, I'd hold these public hearings, and they did it, and NASA got a negative out of the population. They got a straight out negative. And so there was all this foot dragging bit about, how do we answer this problem, and how do we tell them that we're taking another direction, and so on and so forth. Well, that's their problem. But then I got nasty calls from people that were contracted to NASA and so on and so forth. I don't want to even go there, but it was just like middle of the night stuff, and I didn't hear that either. But it was like, it's not my fault. You bozos come up with stuff like this, and it flies in the face of anything that's called common sense. But I remember also saying to one of the scientists, I said, well, Voltaire dit, les bons sens n'est pas si commun. I said, Voltaire said that the good sense is not so common. Mm-hmm. And that's right, uncommon common sense. But you really went way over the mark. And I don't know what your excuse is, but I bet it wouldn't play well before your mother.
Well, it was the last time they did a flyby with plutonium on board, and I really want to thank you for speaking out.
Well, you're welcome.
Taking the brunt. What are you working on now?
Well, actually, what I'm trying to work on now is just sorting out my life with regard to all the damage that has been done, because in 2004, when they moved my apartment from 103 to 303, they destroyed over 60 years of work. Yeah. And they took things like the acrylic of this one and destroyed it. They took the major draftings of this that they could get a hold of and destroyed it. But then there was one too, and I want to leave you with that one. There's something called the Sun Gate amongst the Aymara on the Altiplano, And this, I believe, is what the original would have looked like.
Okay.
But I did have an acrylic of that, and whereas the gate itself has very different things connected with it, this would have been the original form that they would have followed, and they would have known the Greek.
It reminds you of Teotihuacan?
Yeah, somewhat that, but this is something that I did again, where there was a big color production, and there would be the Greek scale as alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, so on and so forth. All a just a rerun in a sense, or not quite a rerun. That's not quite the right word, but definitely doing exactly what was done with the dove descending, and then all these other things. That, in fact, the one I least wanted to discuss coming here was the Trinity. But, for example, all these panels that were in the original article, every one of these were larger drawings than what's here. I mean, these were reduced by camera, but they destroyed all my originals. And indigenous people's language conversions, that Lakota, that was all destroyed. Yeah, all of that was destroyed. All the work that I did was cited in Lucy Lepard's book, called Overlay, Contemporary Art and the Art of Prehistory, and so on and so forth. Everything, and again, she shows the Leipzig there in its original form and shape, and she writes about my work in here quite a bit, more so than I would have had her to. But anyway, she claimed that she would have written even more if she could have had access to the drawings, but she said, but you were nowhere, you were in Europe or something, I don't know where you were. But the thing was that I wanted to also get into the matter of Teotihuacan, because here's another example of wherein, and I have to believe that LeMay knew nothing about my participation in the Manhattan Project. I have to believe that. Because if he had known, he wouldn't have let me do it. He would have said, no, you're too valuable. I can't let you take that risk. Because that's just a good military man that he was. He wouldn't put me in that situation. But I was willing to do it, and I'm glad I did it, because when I went there with two absolutely wonderfully trained surveyors, and that's what LeMay promised me, because he had gotten this gotten into this conversation with von Karman, and von Karman was the guy that was our wind expert. He was the head of JPL, way back. Hungarian Jew, and of course at least 6 of the people who were originally connected with the Trinity were Hungarian Jews, and all coming from that Carpathian small area, and brilliant beyond recognition. I mean, just incredible. And you kind of wondered, how do these people rise to the level of accomplishment that they did, coming from a place which was, in many other ways, something of a police state, and so forth. But they did, and a couple of them had German names, obviously. And I won't go into the reasons for that. But von Karman apparently had the ear of the general, and so he asked me to meet with him in Washington, and I was hesitant. I was 17. I had just returned from Spain, studying with Andrei Segovia, Costa, and I was not thinking about the science of science, kind of thing, or whatever you want to call it, the creme de la creme of scientific study and so on. I wasn't there. I was thinking of the music, but von Karman called and said, I want you to meet with the general, but you must not call him general. Call him Uncle Charlie or something. So I agreed, and I met with him in the Smithsonian, and of course he was not in his uniform. He could look like anybody's handyman or gardener or anything else. I mean, he had common enough looks, and he didn't look that imposing unless he was in his uniform, but he was a remarkable, straight-ahead guy. I liked him right away. Of course, I knew something about his war record, and that spoke a lot to me. Later, he turned in another direction when he got together with Wallace, and when Wallace was running for president, and then he was vice presidential. I mean, that was a bad turn as far as I was concerned. And then he got connected with people like well, I don't know Phyllis Schlafly herself, but I mean, people of that ilk.
He was very happy that Kennedy was murdered.
Well, I don't know about that. I'm not going to go there.
He's well quoted.
Well, he may well be, but I can't go there because I can only go on what my direct memory of him was, and that's what I want to hold with because.
But as you say, he was different. He changed as he.
Well, I think he did, and I think something went awry, but I don't know. Maybe those were old bogeys in the back of his closet or something. I don't have any idea. All I know is that when I met with him, he said, "Von Karman tells me that given two crack surveyors, you can give us the size of the Earth precisely." And I said, "Well, General, I'm not General. I didn't call him General." I said, "Well, Uncle Charlie, whatever." You know, but I said General in my mind because I could never stop thinking of him as General.
Right.
He was, by the way, one of the best organized generals in the Second World War.
Uh-huh.
I mean, he was really tops.
Right.
He made sure the stuff was there. He made sure that people had adequate supply. He made, he was on top of it. But anyway, he said that he wanted to know, and I just knew where his personality was coming from. I said, well, if Von Karman says what he says, he's probably right, and I believe I can do it. But it's more than just a belief. I know I can do it because the sources I have are the sources that go back deep into prehistory, in which there is no fault by virtue of anybody deliberately throwing anyone off track, because they didn't do that. They were concerned with the safety of the planet. He said, well, I'm concerned with the same thing, but he said, I want to know where to put the communication band. And so I took it on, and the first thing that we did was we did Teotihuacan. I could use the one with the calculations on it, but I would prefer not to because it's smaller, number one. Number two, it's with, thank you. It's with some problem in the fact that it has not been with the color designates in place, and therefore it almost is senseless to look at it because you'd never figure out where they were. Okay. But the point is, it is the same image. And this is something, by the way, that would have been close to a scapula type thing that they would wear with the colors in place, like the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and so on. So this is just a black and white. But the main thing is that the measures tell the story. When you see 753 here, for example, it's taking the number of meters that actually exist between the sun pyramid that's here, the moon pyramid that's here, the 90 that is here, and the Venus pyramid that's here. It's taking those measures that you see are figured at the 12th root of 2. In other words, you take the meters to start with, and then you reduce them by the 12th root of 2. Now, why that's important is because 12th root of 2 is what separates every semitone from every other semitone in terms of black and white keys, for example, on the piano, but in the Greek alphabet, because this is totally semitonic. Every single thing is located from the same ratio distance from the other one, from alpha to omega, and there's a D gamma right here because that's the way it was in ancient Greek. But every single thing is on that immutable rainbow order, which is right here along the top of this, and that's again from alpha to omega. And the point is that being the 12th root of 2, that means there's no shilly-shallying around. There's no way that can be altered. There's no way that you can redirect. There's nothing to do but just follow it down. And so the measures are what they are. And the measures from the sun pyramid here, the moon pyramid here, down to this line, and then going across. Now, these are all sightline measures, the thing that make up this portion here. The actual straight ahead, or straightaway, total straightaway, is the only thing where there's an avenue that actually goes down, following from the midpoint of the moon pyramid. And the thing about that is that the name was heard by the Spanish, who almost had tin ears, in effect, because they called it Teotihuacan, and that's not correct. It's actually in the Greek, It's Teotihuacan. Now, if it's said that way, you can hear the Indianness of it, I think.
Yeah, yes.
Teotihuacan. It doesn't sound like Teotihuacan.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing with the so-called Anasazi. The Anasazi is what everybody says. The Navajo say that word all the time. And say now a lot of Navajos say that it's a Navajo word, when in point of fact it really isn't. It's Anasazi. But the minute it's said right, you can hear the Indianness of it in terms of the rhythm. Anasazi. And what that was it was a stand-in, and comes to the same number as harmonia, because the Anasazi were the people of harmony, not enemies, which is what many Navajo were said to say of their people in the same areas as themselves. Remember, they were nomadic, and these other people were builders, and so there was a totally different life. But the Navajo that are really well known, healed, not just well healed, but very educated, know that that doesn't mean what people say it means. It doesn't mean enemy at all. It means the people who taught them everything they know, in effect.
Wow.
And therefore they were beholden. But in any event, what I'm saying is that Teotihuacan, with its measurements, gave us a preliminary statement, because it's actually a musical string going from here down to here, over to here, and up to here, and down over there, going across there. So it's a musical string of a length and a vibration thing. Now, the interesting thing is that the end numbers of these calculations that I'm holding in abeyance, those ending three of the last digits go to 24, which is the Hellenic alphabetic numbers, 25, which is the Germanic, and then there's the Hellenic, which is 25. And let me start again. The Futhark, or the Germanic, is on the outside. Then you have monkey in the middle, which is the Hellenic, and then you have the Semitic on the far side. And so what it says, in effect, that is, if 584 is in the middle in each case, which is why it has its name, Teotihuacan, or Teotihuacan, it's because it adds up to 1239. Now that's very interesting, because there's only one other linguistic unit that admits of this using the Greek letters, and that is the name of the sun, Ekike, the name of the moon, Ilargi, and then the name that comes down here, Artizar, but on either side, which is Venus, but on either side of that is Zinta Belar. And this name was what many people called it who knew who the engineers were. The engineers were Basques.
Basques.
Yes, and they were there well prior to the time of Christ. Now, the total of those indications of the sun, the moon, the, I'm not translating at the moment, Zinta Belar, and the Artizar, which is Venus, one has to come to an understanding. Why do they call it Zinta Belar? It's because Zinta Belar is meaning ribbon grass. Ribbon grass is a cattail reed, and that's what that looks like from the air, a cattail reed. And so it's a very specific term, and if you spell them out, they also come to 1239 exactly. Now, what is the other name that they used? And the Spaniards were very distressed by this. Nazareos. Nazarene. It's because the name was far older than Christianity itself. So that seemed to mean to the Indians, at least, and they were trying to communicate this to the Spaniards, that the man they called Jesus and the faith that they followed in his name was actually the name of a sect not a place name, that was engaged in the keeping of the sciences of the ancient world.
Mm.
And there were two involved. There was Nazarios and there was Magdalene. And of course that would be Jesus, so-called of Nazareth, which is not true because there was no Nazareth in Jesus' day, and Mary Magdalene. But the point is, they were also the names of the science people who kept the record. They were in effect time singers.
Mm.
And I knew this, but what I was welcoming was the opportunity to show why this was the case. So I gave LeMay what he wanted, but I also got more than what he had asked for, because this was just the beginning. We then measured site after site after site, and of course I had the shamefacedness of having to go back to Giza, because I had made a mistake on the north face of all things to make a mistake on. I can't believe it, with the casings in place, the casing blocks in place. I made a mistake on the Great Pyramid in Giza. It was only like something like, 3/4 of an inch, but that's still bad. You don't do that when you're looking at the process of how it got to be what it is. But in any event, I had to go back. But in that, I can tell a story about myself very quickly. The two surveyors and I, we went back. We accomplished it in half the morning, less than half the morning. So since we had Department of Antiquities vehicle and all that stuff being cared for, and the people that needed to get the bakshish all had their payment, and they were satisfied. We mounted a couple of camels, and we went down and measured Saqqara. Yeah. Now, we had crude instruments to do it, but we did it, and the surveyors agreed with me at the end of the day, because we didn't do everything, but we got the basic sight lines down, and we measured the step pyramid very carefully. We took all the time, and the sun was killing us. I don't know what it was doing for the camels, probably made them spit up, but in any event, it made us very uncomfortable. But we did it, and we did it in the space of that time. And then we came back when the dark settled by camels, and nobody realized that we had gone anywhere. But we measured it, and we proved beyond any question that Imhotep was actually using Greek measures throughout. Mm. And yet it was way before people thought the Greeks had any real position there. Right. But we're finding out that they were just about everywhere.
Yeah.
And I can believe it, because they were, they were very modest about their accomplishments. They did not trumpet it to the world, essentially.
We're going to have to pick up on this. When we do a teleconference calling, we're going to have audio, and we're going to have it online. And
right.
This has been quite a day. We have to get you back for Albert, but just want to thank Balt Facebooks and Clyde that allowed us to use this space for this chat, and I hope you enjoyed this talk, and many, many thanks to my daughter helping us with the camera, and GCTV, and especially Bart Jordan. Thank you so much for coming here.
Oh, you're entirely welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.